One. Ladies and gents, what is around the corner? It's time to start tackling other subjects rather than what your class is. Not that we've stopped doing the class guides, but we need to start preparing properly because things are different. This is not Mists of Pandaria, and I've said it several times that WOD groups, especially in the new 5-man content, are falling apart rather quickly. You're generally going to go through a lot of players in the early days, and the key to what we do here is to make sure you guys have great success. That is all I ever want from any of you guys, is to enjoy your experience and overall try and be more successful than the people who are just kind of going through it and having the fun motions, and therefore you should progress much quicker. That's the idea. We want you to be better players. We want you to be the absolute guys in the field and the players that raids want. You're going to be the guy who the players, the raid leaders want in their raid guild, and the ones who want on progress. So in order to do that, it's time to start making some preparations that you can do in Mists of Pandaria. So with the upcoming Warlords of Draenor, Blizzard has made a huge shift. A really huge shift towards mechanics, more so than we've seen before. What they've sort of switched off is the ability to brute force, which is good in my opinion. We've lost that art. It's never been needed, and certainly in Mists of Pandaria it was absolutely reduced to nothingness. If we look at 5-man content in Mists of Pandaria, as it stands right now, because it's so old, it can be soloed essentially by one of the DPSs if you should happen to get somebody rocking those timeless gears. And that's really bad because nobody's learning anything, nobody's getting any better, and habits, bad habits form. Really bad habits, and that's what we need to start breaking very quickly. Otherwise, you're going to run into the potential nightmare that I believe will happen in early Warlords of Draenor, where players are either going to quit the game or take to the forums in outcry, and if Blizzard decides to stick to their guns, even for a short-term period, then they're going to have a really bad time. Really, really bad time. It's very messy right now in Warlords in terms of trying to get content done. So what do you need to do to start preparing for this? We're going to do this pretty briefly, and then I might do a bit of a playthrough where we'll talk about examples of things coming on, but that'll be in a longer video that I'm sure many people will take in their stride and watch it while doing something else. But firstly, you need to be able to read your cast bar. It seems so stupid, right? Most of you probably have a cast bar set up where you can read it, but how often do you read it? Mists of Pandaria has kind of taught us that as soon as you see a cast bar, if you're a reasonable player, is to press your kick button. And that's what I've instilled in you, probably since Cataclysm, because that's how the game worked then. It was cast bar kick. Be super fast on your kicks. I've always been known as somebody who can interrupt extremely quickly. I kind of pride myself on it. It's a good ability to have, especially when it comes up against bosses. Casting back things like Maloriak. Maloriak, I was always the guy you wanted in there. And, of course, things like... I'm just thinking back to all these references to that UBRSE type dungeon, Blackrock Depths or whatever it was called. With the Omnitron defense system on Heroic, I was always, regardless of guild I played in, selected to follow around the Arcane guide to do the interrupts on there and allow it to get mad stacks, because super fast interrupts could allow you to do some crazy things, especially if you're a mage. So I've taught you guys that. And pretty much we instilled this idea that as soon as you see a cast bar, you've got to kick. Well, Draenor has thrown that out the window. And what you guys really need to do is set up your UI in such a way that you actually read your cast bar and see what is being cast. Good reason for this. There are a number of mobs that are now throwing out red herring casts, which means they're casting lots of different types of spells. There are several mobs that have 4 or 5 different casts, and only one of them is the really dangerous one. It goes as far as to have a couple of bosses. The main one I'm thinking of is in the Everbloom. Once you guys get there, the Protector's boss is in there. Three mobs, 2 of them that have casts, and they each have 3 casts each. And 2 of those casts are different levels of dangerous. That means you have to be very, very choosy about what you interrupt. That is even more so in the heroic version. When you interrupt a spell, they become immune to interrupt for several seconds, which means prop pallies out there, you need to stop using Avenger's Shield. Simple as that. You really need to stop doing that because you're going to screw up the fight and you're going to cause a wipe. Very cool idea by Blizz. I'm glad they're pushing it forward like this. So what you guys really need to start thinking about is not only how quick you interrupt, but what are you interrupting? And I'm dead serious in this. You would not believe the absolute collapse rate I'm seeing in 5-man content right now, even on normal, even in sort of the level 92 dungeons. I'm sure with the current gear levels in Mists of Pandaria, most of you will be able to actually overpower them, but then you're going to hit heroic and then it's all going to come flooding back. So it's really good to start now with this. Start learning what the casts are and which ones you need to interrupt, because the rule, the golden rule we always have in 5-mans that we could completely ignore in Mists of Pandaria is that we assume that the other 4 players that we queue with, should we have to do pug content, which every now and again everybody has to do, is really, really bad. The worst of the worst. You go in with that mentality that the other 4 players are going to be an absolute nightmare, and it's going to be up to you, as the fucking baller of the group, to make sure things get done. Really got to make sure things get done, and it's up to you to do it. Which means if you do have people in there who are doing interrupts, and they're a reasonable player, and they're doing fast interrupts, that's fine, but you need to be the guy who's interrupting the correct thing. You need to be able to read that cast bar. You need to learn what's going on in the fights. You have to start doing this. Otherwise, you're really going to screw yourselves up, guys. The next thing you guys really need to do, I'm going to say really a lot, but you absolutely have to do this, is sort UI in a fashion that you can see clearly the buffs and debuffs of the mobs that you're targeting, particularly the buffs. You've got to see this. Now, Blizzard's been quite clever. In several instances, they give you multiple ways of dealing with a particularly dangerous thing. Should it be a debilitating beam or whatever, that can be interrupted and dispelled. Which means for several classes out there, you can deal with that in 2 ways. Or if you've got stuns as well, you have multiple options to deal with this very dangerous ability. So Blizzards give you the opportunity to actually counter that. And if you're a class that has all 3, you can be a superstar on there. Your group will never know. And we always say this. We've said this since fucking patch 4.3 or whatever. Your group will never know. More than likely, if it's a group that's not really paying attention or they're used to the Mists of Pandaria mindset, they'll walk into there, things will go well, they won't know why, and that's okay. A lot of people always ask me, why don't I, if I see things going wrong in a dungeon, why don't I offer advice? When I first started my channel, I actually did that. The problem is, if advice is not asked for, it's not taken very well. And I had to accept that instead of spending my time in games saying, hey, you know, I'm this guy who's got all this experience and I do a YouTube channel and stuff, you know, maybe this might help you, it was actually better to wait for those guys to actually seek out that information and come and find me. And that way they were more ready to accept information rather than me trying to throw it down their neck, because then you get a very nasty reaction. People think you're just calling them bad, even if you're saying, let's interrupt this spell, let's do that, and then it gets all very messy. So I seriously don't recommend that you really try and overly help people in game unless they seem to want it, because you can get some very nasty reactions and people come away with a sour taste in the mouth. If you see somebody asking for help in a dungeon, you certainly should. But other than that, be a little bit careful and be the guy who's making things happen is what I want you to go away with. Be the guy who's making things happen. You know how this boss works. So, on top of that, you need to know what your class abilities are and refresh yourself with what they do. It's amazing to me how many hunters don't realize that Tranquilizing Shot not only removes an enrage, but also dispels a target. It's amazing how many Shadow Priests will never dispel a target. It's amazing how many Shamans won't purge. It's amazing how many Rogues don't realize how Shiv works. You can go into Siege of Orgrimmar trash, probably before the Dark Shamans, and see that most of those mobs have an enrage, and they'll never remove it. And there might be 4 or 5 rogues in there, there's hunters in there, there's druids in there. All these guys have the ability to make this better while the tanks are getting crushed, and they do nothing about it. That should never be you guys. Never be you guys, because once you're in there, you're an invaluable player. People will notice, tanks will notice, somebody will notice. A lot of people always ask me, how do I distinguish myself from the other members of the group? Is it just on the DPS meter? Never. The way you really signify a spot is because you're doing things, someone takes notice and they go, that guy's doing the extra. And he's doing it passively. He's doing it because it's habit. He's noticing these things. So make sure your UI is set up in a way that you can see enrages very clearly. Even if it's a stage of doing a tell me when, I'm considering doing a tell me when thing for everything that's in Warlords of Draenor for the 5-man, so you guys get a nice notification if you can remove something, that you can deal with it, that it pops up nice and obvious. But it's a lot of work. As you can imagine, it's a lot of work. But please make sure your UI, and you're used to looking for these things. Mr. Pandaria, again, has given us very bad habits. In raids, we're kind of used to boss timers letting us know when things are going to happen. And it's getting a little confusing because in some recent raids that I've done, probably about 2 months back, we were doing some of the mythic raid testing, and there was actually other people claiming responsibility for things I was doing, which was very curious. And you might find that starts to happen. I'm just warning you now. There might be things that are happening in raids, and it's actually you dealing with it. If it's in a raid environment, you should certainly be calling it out and saying, no, you know, you're not dealing with this. I'm dealing with it. But in a 5-man environment, guys, please, If you have a shiv or a tranquilizing shot, you're going to be an invaluable member, and I guarantee your success rate in the new 5-man content will skyrocket. This message goes out to tanks. Patience. So much patience. You must have patience in Warlords of Draenor, certainly for your first run through. There is a Mist of Pandaria mindset, which is get in there, grab as many mobs as possible, and start cleaving them down. That does not work in Warlords of Draenor. It does not work until we overgear it. Warlords of Draenor is designed in such a way that each trash pack has many mechanics going on in there, and if you pull too many, if you pull that random patrol, if you stand in the wrong place, your group is very quickly going to find itself in a huge pile of dog shit, and you don't want that to happen. Tanks have to have patience. You will impress no one with your ability to AoE tank in Warlords of Draenor. It's not going to happen for a little while. It really isn't. The amount of people, and I understand this because I have been there in the past, when I see tanks go in there, they've got this mindset because they're coming out of Mr. Pandaria, or they're coming out of a previous expansion where they were overgeared, where they could handle it, where they could brute force it, where they didn't even really need healing, and they're going in there, they're doing mad pulls, and then suddenly you know those DPSers who are like, dude, you fucking suck, blah, 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 worst tank ever, slow down, idiot, all that kind of stuff, and then they're leaving the dungeon, and you're left high and dry. You don't want to be in that group. If you're a DPSer, especially, you've had a 45-minute queue or whatever it might be, and your tank goes in there, he's unprepared and he makes mistakes, you need to be ready to handle that. I've never had to cyclone, blind, fucking vanish, cheap shot as much as I've had to, doing random frost traps, all that kind of stuff. You need to be the guy, because this is about your time. Yeah? This is about your time and your personal success. You need to get that job done. You've waited your time. You're in the dungeon. You need to make sure it happens. A lot of people like to blame others. Oh, I didn't get this group done because of this, this, and this. You have to ask yourself before you make that statement, was there something you could have done to make sure that didn't happen? And that is the mindset of everybody I want on this channel. Everybody in this channel, I want you to have the mindset before you start complaining, was there something you could have done to prevent that problem? Should you have seen it earlier? Should you have seen the patrol coming? Could you have gone over there and distracted them? Could you have fired a preemptive frost trap? Could you have done something? Could you have roots? Could you have cycloned? Could you have stunned? Could you have done something to make this easier and maybe prevent a wipe and keep that group going? Because you've not needed to do it in Mists of Pandaria, and in Warlords of Draenor, you'll certainly need to do it. You'll absolutely need to do it. You're going to need to purge. The last kind of tip I want to give in this general section is out to everybody who has the ability to dispel, whether you're DPS, healer, or tank. I have not had to dispel myself probably at all in Mists of Pandaria while tanking. In Warlords of Draenor, I'm dispelling myself all the time. All the time. There is a multitude of very nasty debuffs in Warlords of Draenor. So many of them. And it contributes to all the failures that I see. If I'm on a class that can't dispel, I'm absolutely pissed, because I know that Blizzard has set the group up in mind where they might be very nasty curses, and they've given us a mage. They've given us a druid. But he's a DPSer, he's a moonkin, he's a feral, and they're not dispelling, and the tanks are just being crunched because the healer can't get rid of it. These dungeons are designed that DPSers should be dispelling. Tanks should be dispelling themselves. You have to be aware, both offensively and defensively, of being able to dispel very nasty debuffs. Looking out for those dangerous casts. I tell you this because, guys, it's very nasty in there right now. Very, very nasty. And I don't want you to fall under the wheels of the bus when it comes. I want you guys to have a much higher success rate than the others are having who are relearning this stuff. Start practicing now. Make sure your UI, the first step is your UI. Get your UI set up in such a way that you can clearly see what's going on. And once you see it the once, you then know that mob does that. When you get into the heroic content and maybe you start doing your challenge modes, it's obviously going to be more important. But it's a bad habit that we've learned from Mr. Pandaria, is that this stuff is completely negligible. It's completely ignorable. It doesn't matter, because the healers can out-heal it, the tanks can out-tank it, and we can certainly out-DPS it. And it's being reset, and it's being turned up. It's being turned up. So be a baller again. All right, guys. See you again.